Good evening and thanks very much for joining us. I'm Brittany Ramsey. Ontario's Education Minister is defending the Ford government's back-to-school plan. Critics say the plan relies too heavily on masks and social distancing to keep students and staff safe, while more emphasis should have been placed on mandatory vaccinations and regular COVID testing. But Lecce says the plan is sound and that the government will also be spending millions on new ventilation systems to improve classroom safety. Colin DeMello reports.
As schools prepare to reopen in September, the Ford government is focusing on ventilation, spending $25 million to buy 20,000 new mechanical ventilation systems that can be installed in any space that doesn't have one.
We'll ensure that all occupied learning environments, including classrooms and gyms, libraries, childcare rooms, portables, and other instructional spaces without mechanical ventilation will now have a standalone HEPA filter placed within it when students return this fall.
In an effort to keep schools as safe as possible next year, other public health measures such as cohorting, physical distancing, and masks will be a requirement. But less than 24 hours after releasing that plan, the Ford government was forced to make a change, allowing high-contact sports to once again be played indoors.
We saw on the list yesterday that hockey and basketball were not being allowed. I think it's prudent, we think it's reasonable, and we certainly want our children to be able to participate in those sports.
But the back-to-school plan is also coming under fire from critics who say it fell short of answering parents' questions.
Where's the meat in this plan around ensuring that not only our kids go back to school, that we have a safe September, but that should something happen, there's a clear plan on how to address it to make sure that our kids are not sent home from school again.
The document does not address the parameters for closing a classroom due to COVID or how unvaccinated students will be impacted. Today, some clarity.
I do not anticipate any difference approach, whether a child's vaccinated or unvaccinated, on any activities within the school setting. We would not be knowledgeable of their immune status, and there shouldn't be any barriers or stigmatization of children who have not received a vaccine.
The Minister of Education is also stressing that vaccines will not be mandatory.
Government has been clear, our Premier has been clear, we will not mandate vaccine requirement for schools and for staff at this point.
The minister says it is about respecting the choice of individuals.
Meanwhile, Thunder Bay's education leaders say overall they're rather pleased with the province's back-to-school plan. While there are still some kinks to be worked out, local officials are looking forward to a more normal academic year, highlighted by the return of extracurricular activities. Xavier MacRae has more.
With just 1 month before Thunder Bay classrooms return to life for the first time since late February, local school boards and teachers' unions are sorting through the paperwork preparing for the return of in-person learning. Education Minister Stephen Lecce has released his plan for the return, and while there are some gaps, it's getting a mostly positive reaction in Thunder Bay.
Number one, it's great to hear about going back to school for in-person learning, where staff and students can be face-to-face and learning takes place as best as it can.
We're very excited to be going back to school in as normal a fashion as possible, and yesterday's announcement was, I think, very well received by our public, and we're looking forward to next month.
Directors of Education Ian MacRae from the Lakehead Board and Pino Tassone from the Catholic side were mostly pleased with the plan, but there are some concerns. The main one revolves around the little direction from the government on how schools will proceed when a positive test is found within the facility. Vaccines will also not be mandatory for staff and students.
I think they're suggesting that immunization is the only way to really combat COVID to the most effective extent. And for not having mandatory vaccinations policies is somewhat of a disappointment to us.
But if we do a good job of encouraging and educating our staff and students that it's important to vaccinate, it's going to bring our COVID numbers in a positive direction. I think that's the direction we want to go.
The most exciting announcement from the government was the return of extracurricular activities, including sports, clubs, and field trips. Now, these activities were one of the many casualties of the pandemic last school year, but their revival comes as a beacon for the physical and mental well-being of students.
To do something outside of the school with other students that they don't normally are in class with is extremely important to do something that they love and enjoy.
It's huge, and it's a big relief for those that are going into their last years of high school for sure, but I would say it's a big part of everything, right from K to 12.
Lecce also announced $25 million worth of funding Wednesday to further improve ventilation systems in schools. Both boards are unsure if any of that money will come their way, but ensure even if it doesn't, their systems have been improved over the past year and will be ready for the fall. Avery MacRae, TBT News.
Well, it's another step in the return to normalcy as the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce held its first in-person gathering today since the onset of the pandemic. Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy was the keynote speaker at today's Leaders' Luncheon. Ryan Benazzo has details.
It's a sound that's been sorely missed. Applause inside a room not quite full of people, but as full as many of those in attendance at the Chamber of Commerce Leaders' Luncheon have been in quite some time.
It kind of feels like a step forward and another indication that things are recovering, and so that's positive for us.
Attendees wore buttons indicating their individual comfort level, some proudly displaying their vaccination status, welcoming hugs and handshakes. Others, like Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy, indicating they're not quite ready for that level of physical contact. And his keynote address made clear that it's not business as usual in Ontario just yet.
As we chart our course out of this pandemic.
The finance minister spending as much time talking about public health as the public purse, noting vaccinations are key to keeping the economy afloat.
That's really helping businesses. It allowed us to get to stage 3, which allowed for 50% reopening of indoors for a lot of businesses. But the key to success will be the ongoing vaccination program.
And Bethlenfalvy says his mission is to ensure he directs enough money toward that effort, even in the face of a projected $29 billion provincial deficit.
The best way to rebound, I think, is a growing economy. I mentioned in the budget, raising taxes or cutting spending is not really the path that we've chosen.
But last month, the Independent Financial Accountability Office noted Ontario actually spent about $10 billion less than expected during the last fiscal year, giving ammunition to critics who say the province didn't do enough to support people during the pandemic. Robinson says she'll continue to lobby on behalf of the local business community.
We need the government to understand just how imperative it is for businesses to not be asked to close again unless there's absolutely no other option.
Ryan Benazzo, TBT News.
The Wabsmung First Nation near Kenora could start evacuating vulnerable members tonight due to a pair of forest fires that are threatening the community and sending thick smoke into the area. Kenora Fire 51 is burning about 12 kilometers northeast of the First Nation, while another smaller fire on the Manitoba side of the border is burning southwest of the community. Chief Waylon Scott and his council have been working with federal and provincial officials, as well as several area agencies, to make sure health, transportation, and lodging needs are met. Spaces have been found in Kenora, Dryden, Manitoba, and other Ontario locations should a full-scale evacuation be needed. Stats Canada has released its annual crime figures for Canadian cities in 2020, and for the 5th straight year, Thunder Bay ranked #1 in homicides. These stats also include rankings for hate crimes and other offenses. William Dougal has more.
Statistics Canada released their comprehensive police-reported crime statistics for 2020, and Thunder Bay sits as the murder capital of Canada for the 5th year in a row after seeing 8 homicides last year. That played a big part in Thunder Bay ranking 2nd in crime severities across Canada, trailing only Winnipeg by 1 point. Despite these troubling statistics, overall crime has actually fallen nearly 16%. Thunder Bay Police spokesperson Chris Adams says the ongoing pandemic can help make sense of that decline.
2020 was a very unusual year for communities as a whole, as well as policing. From a crime standpoint, we saw a very dramatic drop in property crime in 2020, and that's really linked directly to the fact that a number of businesses were closed, people were staying home. That really did have a very big impact on that.
Meanwhile, Thunder Bay ranked 5th nationwide for hate crimes per 100,000 people, behind Peterborough, Ottawa, Guelph, and Vancouver. The number of reported local hate crimes jumped from 4 incidents in 2019 to 14 in 2020. Adams says awareness and good police work can increase reporting.
I think there are a number of factors that come into play when it comes to the reporting of hate-motivated crime, and that really is awareness. Some people feel that are victims of it, in some cases less likely at times to come forward and make a complaint to police. However, I'd have to say that our officers do a pretty good job when it comes to interviewing and looking into these things.
The Stats Canada report does not just bring bad news. The Thunder Bay Police are yet again above the national average in closed and solved cases. Furthermore, the data from this report will be used to inform the local police and government in regards to which community partners need to be invested in order to work towards lower crime rates in the future. William Dougal, TBT News.
A local city councilor is interested in once again using the Boulevard Lake Dam to generate hydroelectric power. At-large Councillor Mark Benz wants city staff to provide a high-level overview on whether or not that's feasible. There's infrastructure already in place, as private operators did run a small hydro plant on site until 2019 before he and the city struck an agreement to terminate the lease. Ben says as Thunder Bay strives to reach net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050, the city needs as much green energy as it can get.
We need to utilize green power if it's economically and environmentally feasible. It's really that simple. We should extract any green power we can from the infrastructure we own. The city is quite involved with green power with solar panels through Synergy North. So this would complement this in terms of hydro. It's a small amount of green power, but every little bit helps.
Now, at this point, Benz isn't sure whether the power should be used locally or sold into the provincial grid. If council approves the motion on Monday, administration will be asked to report back next March. The lack of rainfall in the Northwest over the past few months has been less than ideal for farmers and their crops. Lakehead University's Agricultural Research Station was still able to organize its annual summer tour, but the research farm off Highway 61 is just one of many that have felt the effects of the unprecedented weather. Alex Flood has details.
The lack of rain this growing season has created all-time dry conditions for farming communities across the region. Despite that, LEU's Agricultural Research Station has managed to test new crops and experiments throughout the drought and is now showcasing their efforts to local farmers and the public. Without significant rainfall, however, farmers run the risk of losing all of their pasture and feed for their livestock by the fall season. Livestock numbers are already dropping because of the lack of feed, while many creeks and streams that cattle would typically rely on are completely dried up. Research Station Director Tarlok Singh Sahota has been facing the heat crisis head-on.
In the month of May, June and July, we got 193 milliliter rainfall, whereas we should have got at least 300 milliliter in these 3 months. So if we get 100 milliliters, so we got little less than two-thirds. So our crop, you can see, they are growing, but they would have grown better if there was more rain.
Since we are seeing a shortage in feed, as we're chopping some cereal crops that we would have normally combined and made grain out of to sell. Now we're just harvesting them and feeding them to our livestock.
Farming communities out west, such as Kenora, Dryden, and Rainy River, received Ford government funding last month, which will go towards relief efforts amid the dry conditions. The Thunder Bay area, however, is yet to see any of that type of funding from the province. Jason Reid, a director for Beef Farmers of Ontario, says without any assistance to protect their crops and cattle, the trickle-down effect could be catastrophic.
Without cattle, we don't have the farms. Without the farms, we don't have the spending. We don't have the grocery stores getting supply. We also don't have the feed stores and the local dealerships being able to sell. Like that cattle herd and breeding stock is the backbone to the economy. So that's really what these funding and government relief is all about, is not bailouts and buyouts to be subsidies to farmers. It's about sustaining that core that we need to be able to drive our local economies.
Alex Flood, TBT News.
A heart-wrenching exhibit called Legacy of Hope was launched at Inner City Shopping Center today. It's aimed at creating awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women and the Two-Spirit LGBTQ community. The Lakehead University project was originally planned for a National Indigenous Peoples Day in June, but was postponed due to the pandemic. Catalina Gillies has more.
The message was loud and clear. The high rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and members of the Two-Spirit community is a serious issue. Lakehead University took the initiative to bring this to light by partnering with the Indigenous-led Legacy of Hope Foundation. The public exhibit is meant to bring awareness to the local community and allow healing for those who have been impacted. Billboards with detailed information were displayed, and a ceremonial drum song and smudge were performed. Several notable speakers shared their support, including Fort William Chief Peter Collins.
You know, I stand strong, I stand supported for all the families that lost loved ones over generations. It's a strong commitment on my behalf.
Every day is a hope that more of our missing women come home.
Community manager for the Ontario Native Women's Association, Michele Solomon, says there's a lot of information out there that displays Indigenous women in a negative light, rather than focusing on the important roles they have in the community.
The only way that we are going to get to the point of taking action on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is if we are aware and if we're educated, and if we're educated about the issues that contribute to this tragedy. Without that knowledge, then we're not in a position to take action.
Vice Provost of Indigenous Initiatives at Lakehead University, Denise Baxter, says this is the third exhibit they've put on from the Legacy of Hope Foundation. She believes these community-based projects are well-researched and educational, and says they've received a lot of positive feedback from past exhibits.
We try to really partner with community, other community organizations or people from the community at a grassroots level, just so that we can bring, voice and a broader understanding to the particular issues and concerns. I mean, these are people. These are people's lives that have been lost, or people that are missing that are near and dear to us.
The exhibit will be on display for the next 10 days to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women and to hopefully prevent future violence. It'll then be loaned out across Canada every year to ensure the continued education of this ongoing tragedy. Catalina Gillies, TBT News.
Well, Dave's was Abe's, not Dave's. Abe's.